This is Markus, Nicole, and Harald, and we're going to talk about the Enlightenment. First, a brief history. When was this period? The Enlightenment was between 1620 and 1790. According to French historians, though, they say it was between 1715 and 1789. 1715 because that was the year the French King Louis XIV died. 1789 was the start of the French Revolution. More recently, historians have said that the period started circa 1620, the same year the scientific revolution started. Why did this happen? The scientific revolution started because, with the advent of technological advancements, came a lot of scientific discoveries about the world. This meant an increase in available knowledge. Examples of things that was discovered during this period. Some of Newton's main ideas. Lavoisier discovered oxygen. But the scientific revolution wasn't the only thing that led to the Enlightenment. During the time, society was slowly becoming more industrialized, even if the Industrial Revolution hadn't started for real. Printing books started to become cheaper and more common. Because of the cheaper production, the price dropped. This meant that books became more available to the common man, and therefore the general level of education rose. Coffee houses affected the Enlightenment very much. It was a place where people could come together and freely discuss and share their views and opinions in a civilized manner. Many coffee houses also hosted their own personal library, and visitors were able to read the books while they were there. There are three main themes that defines this period. Empirical learning. You become enlightened by experience. Everything in our consciousness is derived from what we experience. This idea was created by John Locke. We are blank sheets that the world projects on. Our senses makes us who we are. Rapid development of novel and satire. This was due to the increased level of critical thought towards restriction of freedom, religious interference, and the government. These early critical thinkers needed a way to express themselves in a way that could be understood. This is done through their literature. Increased availability of printed material for both authors and readers. I mentioned this a bit more above. There were also some typical ideas about how to think during this period. Here are some of them. Now introducing Nicole.
Empirical learning. You become enlightened by experience. Everything in our consciousness is derived from what we experience. This idea was created by John Locke. Rationalism means that you base knowledge on logical reasoning. Rationalists believe that reality has a logical structure that is meant to be followed. This kind of reasoning is very clear in Isaac Newton's work. Empiricism states that knowledge comes primarily from sensory experience. Empiricists believe that what you know must be based on some kind of scientific fact or observation. A typical empiricist quote, often used by natural scientists, is, "Knowledge is based on experience." Criticism is the practice of judging the merits or flaws of something. During the Enlightenment, as the people became more educated, they became more critical towards society and the people in charge. Egalitarianism comes from the French word for equal. The term has two definitions: that everyone should have the same political, economic, social, and civil rights, or a social philosophy advocating for the removal of economic inequalities among people, economic egalitarianism, or the decentralization of power. There's many forms of egalitarianism, such as gender egalitarianism, racial equality, etc. Deism comes from the Latin word for God. You believe that there's a God, but it doesn't affect your everyday life. God doesn't have a role in our lives. It's up to yourself to decide. This philosophy grew especially during the Age of Enlightenment, especially in Britain, France, Germany, and the United States. They would typically grow up believing in Christianity but disapprove the organized religion, as Christianity is.
Now introducing myself. Here are some famous authors from the time. Under the fiction category, we have Afra Ben with Oronuku and Jonathan Swift with Gulliver's Travels. And under the non-fiction category, we have John Locke, who wrote about liberalism, and Isaac Newton, who wrote about physics. We also have Francis Bacon, who formed the basics of our scientific method and pointed out logical flaws in process of reasoning of many people. Now introducing Markus.
This is Afra Ben, a very important female writer from the Enlightenment. Her first novel was called Forced Marriage, which was published in 1670, but the most successful one, and the one that we're going to talk about, is Oronuku. Oronuku was a bold novel. It was a challenge novel. Wanting to abolish slavery about 200 years before it's actually happening is a super bold thing to do. She made a slave seem like people, like humans, just like you and I. And she also made a feminist statement about the fact that women were not the ones in power during this time. Did I mention that at one point she was a freaking spy? She went under the codename Astrea. She was tasked with being a so-called honeypot to lure in an important Dutchman into seduction. Let's cut that story short and just say that it didn't work out for her, and she was in huge debt when she came back to England, and therefore she was imprisoned. When she got out of prison, she swore to never rely on another man again, and for this independence, she became the first female playwright to make a living off her work. She was a master of satire, known for being witty. She broke the stereotypes, and is even seen today as an important first step for women in theatre. In total, she made 17 plays and 14 novels. Let's have a quick look at a random sentence from Oronuku. You'll quickly notice the fact that it's a very long sentence, which was not super uncommon for the time. You will notice the different spelling on the turned, aimed, and practiced. And if you check towards the end of the sentence, you'll also notice the fact that they're bashing on religion, also a very common thing for the time. Jonathan Swift was born in the 3rd of November, 1668, and he was an Irish author and one of the world's biggest satirists. He went by many names when publishing, such as Lemuel Gulliver, Isaac Bickerstaff, the Draper, or even sometimes leaving it blank and staying anonymous. The first novel he ever published was A Tale of Tub in 1704, which was about corruption in religion and the educational system. He was a master of both Herocian and juvenile style of satire. He was so good that he even had his own style of satire called Swiftian. This term was coined after he released A Modest Proposal, since the humor was deadpan and ironic. A Modest Proposal, or as it's actually titled, A Modest Proposal for Preventing the Children of Poor People from Being a Burden to their Parents or Country, and for Making them Beneficial to the Public, was a book where the narrator goes over a set of horrible proposals and how the poor people of Ireland should sell their children to the rich as food, stating that a well-nourished child at the age of 1 makes the perfect meal. A Modest Proposal had a huge influence on a lot of things that there simply isn't enough time to talk about. Finally, he also published Gulliver's Travels, but you probably already knew that. It was about Gulliver and his travels.